Alright, so where we last left off on when Masters of the Universe went to the birds and the history of Zoar and Screech, which we kind of aren't going to talk that much about Screech actually, more of Zoar. But we talked about last time how both of them came from previous Mattel lines and were redecos of animals that already existed in the tooling bank. In the case of Zoar and Screech, they started life off as Big Jim's Eagle, which actually had two different sets, Big Jim's Eagle and the Eagle of Danger Peak, which why there are two different decos of Big Jim's Eagle. And as well as the name coming from a previous Mattel toy that was an actual flying eagle toy that would land on a child's arm, and hey, who doesn't like falconing? So that's kind of half the knowledge, right? Is where the tool came from. But the other half is the relationship to Teela and the Sorceress, which, for those of you who follow the history of Masters of the Universe, and if you watch this channel, you probably are one of them. Well, Teela and Sorceress started off as two characters from one action figure. I know, a little confusing, but think of it as a head swap. So Teela, as we know, and that's what she was called on package, was the warrior goddess, but she was meant to represent the warrior and the goddess. What I mean by that, and I've explained this in a couple of videos, but to recap, girl toys, especially in the early 80s, didn't sell that well to boys, and Masters of the Universe was meant to be a boys' toy line to compete with Star Wars. And Teela started off as two different characters. So there was the warrior and there was the goddess. And the idea was when you dressed up the character with the snake armor, it was the goddess. And when you dressed up the character without the snake armor and used the shield, it was the warrior, Teela. This was further differentiated in the mini-comics by having the sorceress/goddess character with the snake armor painted green, and Teela given a blonde do, even though the action figure had red hair, which neither of these characters had in the mini-comics. But the point was to help, but kids to differentiate them as two different characters represented by the same toy, whether or not you put on the snake armor. And in a lot of the early mini-comics, the characters are referred to as both the sorceress and or the goddess, which makes it even more confusing. But the idea is, with snake armor, magical character who hangs out with bunny rabbits and deers. Without snake armor, a warrior ally of He-Man who helps fight crime and, stuff. Now, the first time we see this character associated with a bird, well, it's more that she's hanging out with all of the animals in the forest, the deer, the bunny rabbits, as I noted, and above her soars a bird. It's not necessarily Zoar, but rather just one of the, foresty animals she hangs out with. The next time there's any appearance of both the sorceress and the bird-like character that somehow is either follows her around, is her agent, is her, well, we're going to get to all of that because it's an interesting journey. So in the ordeal of Mani-Faces, we see Skeletor creating Mani-Faces by forcing an Eternian actor to drink a poison drink. And this makes him a slave of Skeletor, and one of the first things he does, of course, is teams up with him to capture Teela, because that's what happened in all of the early mini-comics. It's actually shocking how many times Teela's being constantly manhandled or in danger, or, if you will, almost overly sexualized in a pose where she's in danger somehow. You'll see that on a lot of the covers that we're going to be covering, no pun intended, coming up. Alright, so Mani-Faces and Skeletor capture Teela, and for the very first time, we are introduced to Falcon, a character that answers the calls of the Sorceress, here called the Sorceress, character with the snake armor on, and Falcon has the ability to speak, and essentially comes to tell the Sorceress that Teela has been captured, so kind of acting as a, one of her nature animals, like when she was hanging out with the deer and the bunny rabbits an episode or so ago. So, the Sorceress, heeding the words of Falcon, arrives at the royal palace and successfully recruits He-Man to come and, rescue Teela. Alright, now we jump ahead to the Terror of Triclops. So we're now in the second year of mini-comics, 1983. These were all produced by DC, as well as the previous one and the Ram Man mini-comic. Now in this one, the only real connection with the bird maybe Zoar is this opening shot where the heroes are hanging out, and above Teela is a bird. But I think it's really just kind of like a seagull. I don't think that's supposed to be Zoar. But hey, we're going for an all-encompassing documentary here, right? All right, so this now brings us to the next mini-comic, an important one. This is the Tale of Teela, noted as mini-comic 5. So this is the one that starts off with the really creepy premise that Skeletor wants a bride, and the best way he can think of doing this is by kidnapping the Sorceress, or as she's called, the Goddess in this one, and cloning her, because cloning, it's not just for Star Wars anymore. The idea is he's going to raise this child to be his bride, which is not creepy in any way at all. Hey, these were children's toys in the 80s. Well, this is where we first learn about a connection between the Sorceress, or the Goddess, and Teela, and the fact that they're one and the same being. They're clones of each other. Mother-daughter-ish. First they start off fighting, and then eventually the Sorceress Goddess has to combine with Teela to become her full self again, and does this through a magical bear hug, because, that's how cloning works, and becomes kind of a hybrid Sorceress Teela character with snake armor and flowing blonde hair. I'm surprised we never did this as a figure in Classics. That would have been cool, like clone Teela Sorceress hybrid character. And then they separate again and become separate characters and can now forever be Teela and the Sorceress. But before she leaves, the Sorceress has one last little shot with the Talon Fighter, our first kind of hint of a bird there, and she waves goodbye and everyone leaves. And, this is because comics are weird, especially the early Masters of the Universe mini-comics. Continuity wasn't exactly nailed down. All right. So now we're off to the Magic Stealer. Oh, look, there once again is the Sorceress in her semi-erotic pose being, captured by Skeletor. All right. Besides that, here we find her again with her bunny rabbits and deer hanging out in the forest, and once again, she needs to seek He-Man's aid. So she does so, and now we get our very first mention of Zoar ever. So there's Zoar parked on top of He-Man's tack track, and he's referred to as one of He-Man's guides and his allies, just as much as Ram Man or, Teela. So there goes He-Man with his ally Zoar the Falcon, who is an independent character. They go off to save Eternia and deal with the Magic Stealer device, as well as Procrustes, who's the giant that lives in the center of Eternia, holding the planet together for reasons. There's a whole other video on that. Go watch the Procrustes video. But yep, there you see Zoar with the armor, swooping around, hanging out with He-Man, as much of an ally as Ram Man or Man-E-Faces or Man-at-Arms. Zoar is just a bird, but is one of He-Man's allies. And we get to see Zoar using his lasers for the first and only time, which is cool because you never really see Zoar using lasers. I mean, Dr. Evil must be excited to have, it'd be like having a bird with freaking lasers on the sides of his ears. I don't know. Lasers make everything cooler, don't they? So Eternia is once again saved, and the Sorceress can once again go back to living with her nature friends like the deer and the bunny rabbit from previous issues, because that's what she does. And oh, look, there's a bird up there. But again, I don't think that's Zoar. I think that's that seagull that was hanging out with Teela a while ago. I wonder why that seagull never got an action figure. All right, well, flashing ahead, that actually is Zoar now. We can tell because Zoar is orange or red, definitely not white like the magical seagull that's been following everyone around. And once again, a ally of He-Man, and they're, best buds again. Now we jump to the Talon Fighter, or rather the Power of Point Dread, the mini-comic as opposed to the record book. Now here, once again, we have Zoar teaming up with He-Man as an original character, but called Zoar the Fighting Falcon for the first time, not just Falcon or Zoar. And once again, they fly into battle together. We see Zoar in its armor, the armor with the lasers on the sides, and once again it's just He-Man and Zor teaming up, because Zor was introduced as a character in the '83 line as a legitimate hero, just same as Ram Man. We also see that Zor can talk, and Zor hangs out. He does everything that other heroic warriors do. He helps guard Point Dread, and he just happens to be a giant eagle. So now we have the Power of Point Dread, the record book, not to be confused with the mini comic. This one not only comes with the actual Talon Fighter and Point Dread, but it had 2 stories. It's also significant that this is the very first time we meet Zodak, the Cosmic Enforcer, because he was a very late add to the '82 line. So he doesn't show up until a late 1983 mini-comic appearance, because, he wasn't around even though he came out in '82, he was such a late add to the line, replacing the Sorceress as a second character when she and Teela became combined as one toy, and they needed another figure, so Zodak was added. All right, well, this video is not about Zodak. It is about Zor, and here we have Zor showing up in the record book, and this time as an agent of the Sorceress. For the very first time, Zor is now reporting to He-Man specifically as an agent of the Sorceress and giving information. And for the first and only time, we see Zor using his bomb attack, which is noted on package as one of the things that Zor can do. And Zor drops a bomb on Skeletor because, it doesn't get cooler than dropping a bomb on Skeletor because, why not? It's also noted that in this record book, this is the first and only time that we see Skeletor's hood fall off and seeing his full skull underneath. So, hey, why not indeed? Pretty cool. All right, now we jump ahead back into the mini-comics with the Masks of Power, probably one of the most requested figure duos that never got made in classics. And even though we don't see Zor, this is the first time we see the Sorceress without the snake armor, the very first time we see her with the bird armor, or bird motif, if you will, as well as Prince Adam turning into He-Man, actually on page. Next, we jump to He-Man and the Insect People, and again, we see the Sorceress in her bird motif, all of this being because at this point, Filmation was being developed, the animated series, and the idea was to give the Sorceress a distinct look so she would not be confused with Teela, because sometimes when Teela wears the snake armor, she's still called Teela in a lot of the early material. So, the Sorceress became the Bird Lady and officially got a new visual from Filmation where she was dressed as a bird and not at all as a snake armor. It's also significant that this mini-comic is the first time Teela is shown with red hair, and as she looks as in the action figure as well as the Filmation series. All right, jumping ahead to the Obelisk, one of the last '83 mini-comics before we hit into '84, and the Sorceress once again now in her bird motif, but in a white version of her outfit. The same version that we see in the next mini-comic, the Temple of Darkness, which is how she was named as an action figure in the MOTU Classics line. It's significant in this mini-comic that this is the very first time that we ever see Zor as a bird, in this case a white version of Zor, actually being a transformed version of the Sorceress. Skeletor is able to capture the Sorceress in her Zor form, but she's able to use her sorceressy powers to communicate with He-Man, even though she's trapped in her bird form. But it's the very first time we've ever seen Zor as a animal version, if you will, of the Sorceress, where they're the same character, as opposed to Zor's original appearances being an ally of He-Man, who just happens to be a giant bird, or an agent of the Sorceress who comes and tells He-Man messages and, stuff from the Sorceress. So Skeletor, with gloves on, tries to make, magical mincemeat of the Falcon, who apparently in Falcon form cannot actually speak, unlike earlier appearances, can only say bird things. And while Skeletor tries to vanquish the bird, he doesn't realize that because the Sorceress is actually disguised as Zoar, all of the power of the Sorceress is there, and she's finally able to emerge back into her human form by sprouting out of a plant, which makes absolutely no sense, but again, these were early comics, there was very little continuity, and why not jump out of a plant? Because comics are still weird. I don't know, I didn't write this stuff, but we tried to adapt so much of it in the classics, you could see why we had a hard time. Alright, so Sorceress, once again, in her white form, but now we see her, as she's leaving, becoming Zoar. So it's the first time we see her transforming into her bird form. And we also have an early version of He-Man, saying, time for us to begin our journey, and goodbye, and journey safely. I wonder if that's where they got good journey from. But Zoar soaring off, now only able to say bird sounds, scree, scree, again, lost the power of speech. And He-Man and his allies run off as the adventure continues. And Teela's sporting a nice pink outfit in this one. Again, I wonder why we never did that as a deco change for classics. Would have been cool. Why not? All right. Now we're going to jump ahead a couple years. The next time that Zoar and the Sorceress show up in mini-comics together is in Skeletor's Dragon, which is the famous mini-comic with the tug-of-war fight. Here, the Sorceress is now sporting a lovely pink outfit. Maybe she borrowed it from Teela. Maybe they shop at the same Eternia clothing outlet that sells white and pink versions of things. All right, other than introducing the pink outfit, that was about it. Now we move on to the Stench of Evil, the mini-comic that came with Stinkor. And here we see the Zoar in a pink form becoming the pink form of the Sorceress. So again, this is really only the second time we've seen the transformation happen on panel, where Zoar the Eagle or Zoar the Falcon is shown as being another form of the Sorceress, as opposed to, again, just being what the Sorceress's agent or that seagull that keeps showing up hanging out with people. Now we're going to jump ahead another couple years to when the Horde was introduced, and we have the Mantenna, the evil Menace of the evil Horde, one of my favorite Horde members, especially the toy as a kid. And this is notable because Zoar is now back in his original form with the armor on again for the first time in years, and Teela is riding Zoar, which is the first time we ever see a heroic warrior doing this, and that they're supposed to fit around the armor. The armor's been gone for a long time. Now we're going to the very end of the mini-comics, the Ultimate Battleground, the one that came with Eternia, the giant playset from 1987 that very few people actually got because very few were made. The line was ending. But hey, if you live near El Segundo, you could pick one up at the Mattel store. Here, for the first time, we see the Sorceress in her Filmation colors in a Mattel-produced mini-comic. So while she's been in the bird motif a few times, in white, in pink, that brief one where she was in zebra stripe, nope, just kidding, that was Batman. But here she is in her red and white and blue look that was created for Filmation to differentiate her from Teela, to make sure it was not confusing anyone that they were the same character, which they were at once, both as a toy and as a clone, and it's confusing. All right, then we move on to the Search for Keldor, which is the most famous cover of the Sorceress because, well, she's front and center and in her Filmation colors, bursting right there, separating the good guys from the bad guys, as any good sorceress should do. And we learn that she can now leave Castle Grayskull without having to become a bird. I guess that was never really established, but now it is that's why she became Zoar, because that allowed her to leave the castle. And hopefully we'll learn more about Keldor one day in the Classics line, or 2000X, as He-Man waves goodbye to the Sorceress, once again transforming into Zoar, again without armor. The armor's gone again. Now we jump into Enter Buzzsaw Hordak, because, Hordak is always better when he's got a buzzsaw. And once again, we have the Sorceress flying around as a regular human character, not needing to transform into Zoar, but having the ability to fly. And of course, Hordak captures her, and what better way to capture anyone than to put them inside of a giant bubble, which we all know from comic books is the number one way to capture a powerful hero. If you can get that powerful hero into a bubble, well, pretty much game over. So, good for Hordak for understanding the power of the bubble trap. All right. So, the final mini-comic of the original line, The Powers of Grayskull, The Legend Begins, really only significant as far as our Zoar Sorceress connection is the fact that we have the Sorceress once again in her full-on Filmation colors, in her bird design, although she does not transform between Zoar and her human form, or Falcon in human form. She does have her sort of bird in the background there. I guess you could maybe think of that as a transformation. But that was the only time Zoar would appear with the Sorceress in this mini-comic. She spends the rest of the time essentially storytelling and pointing out to He-Man all of the wonders of Preternia, which included dinosaurs and magicians and giants and, stuff. So they have their little adventure. The Sorceress helps He-Man go back in time, which it's revealed through Mattel behind-the-scenes documents is that Central Tower has a time machine. It's kind of like a DeLorean. Whew, wow. Okay, what a long, strange trip it's been. Zoar, and to lesser extent Screech, have had an amazing, amazing history in the Masters of the Universe brand. Zoar starting off as the name of a eagle toy that would hang out on little kids' arms, to becoming a eagle in the Big Jim line, not called Zoar, but just called an eagle, but at least that's where the tool originated from, the mold. And then eventually the name Zoar was reused as the eagle in Masters of the Universe, and then Filmation decided to make this character the alter ego of the Sorceress, using the Sorceress's colors from the show. And that is how the Sorceress and Zoar have been connected, unconnected, reconnected, sometimes armor, sometimes no armor, sometimes missiles, every once in a while, once a giant bomb missile, lasers, and, definitely not a fighter jet. Although how cool would it have been if, Zoar became an actual fighter plane and could launch missiles? That would be, way cooler, right, than just having, lasers? All right. Thanks for sticking with me. I know this has been a long one, but I hope an interesting one. If you like this video, please do share it with others. It helps the channel out a ton. If you have any questions, comments, leave them below. Always happy to answer them.